If you look at the armor model for the final objectives, you're going to notice that the weakest parts are these air vents, these circular air vents. They're like 30 millimeters, and this door is 70, and the back is 90, and the side is 165. I see a lot of people trying to shoot at the front, and they can't damage the front. You see how it says N? That means it has no value. It's infinite. And if you're wondering about this little deck over here, no, you can't damage it. So something that some people will do is they'll come with their artillery and they'll hit the back of the tank to damage it. And I've seen people drop artillery strikes, and believe it or not, seeing an artillery strike, I saw someone drop an artillery strike and damage was done, but I don't know if it was the artillery strike that actually damaged the objective. And the other thing that some people will do, and this really works, when you get to the back, switch to high explosive rounds and shoot for those air vents or this door, and you'll do a lot more damage to the objective. So definitely use those high explosive rounds for the final objective. When I play, I usually anticipate, when I'm going after the final objectives, my best tank is a fast tank, like a light tank. So I usually plan for that. And I'm going to give you the strategy for fast tank. If you're at E, I usually go through the rail lines and head for number 2. And usually the enemy is going to be near this bridge area. If they're not, just keep on going to 2. If they are, take an alternative route. The other thing that you can do is at number 4, where the corner is, there's a building where you can hide inside this little building and snipe at number 4. Another thing that you can do is that from number 2, there's a tall building, I'm pointing at it with the mouse, that you can snipe at number 2 as long as you got good penetration. Or you can go up here where these rocks are and hit the back. These are the safe positions that I run to. Or you can go where I'm pointing somewhere over here by number 3, and you can snipe at number 2 from where number 3 is. For number 1, I like to go to where these 3 buildings are, and I go between these 2 buildings, come out, get close to that building, and snipe over at number 1. The enemy has to do a lot of repositioning in order to get you, and this is the safest place. For number 5, I go to where I'm pointing with the mouse. There's a slope over here, and I hit number 5 from over there. It doesn't always work. It depends on how the enemy defenses are set up. The other thing I do is I come to the red line over here and I shoot from a distance. So those are the 2 choices that I make. And if I have high explosives, I'll come to this position and I'll shoot for number 5. It might work for number 4, I'm not sure. The other thing you can do for number 4 is you want to get to the elevated area at number 4. If you get to this elevated platform, the enemy tanks are more likely to gonna shoot at your allies on the lower portion, and it's more difficult for them to hit you. If they're on this lower portion and you're on the elevated part, it's more difficult for them to hit you because they're not going to see your entire tank, and they're going to be more inclined to see your stronger armor, such as your turret. So you want to go for the elevated position near the stairs where there's a little bit of an object to hide behind. Also, I don't know if I mentioned this, for number 3, you can hit it from the point where I'm pointing at the mouse. You can hit that position if you've got high explosive rounds that do a lot of damage. So there's different positions you want to learn for playing these final objectives. There's certain places where you can play where you can defend 2 different objectives from one position. For example, when I defend 1 and 2, I try to set up somewhere in between 1 and 2. And when I defend 4 and 5, I get between 4 and 5. Now, obviously, you can't always do this, but ideally, that's what you want to do. If you have a slow tank, you're going to need time to get into position. If you have a fast tank, it'll be easy to mobilize. And the reason why you want to do this is because if you're between the 2 objectives and suddenly one of them is under attack, you can easily reposition to one objective or the other. So that's the ideal defensive point. When it's time to attack the objectives, you want to go after objectives that are the least defended, especially if you have a fast tank. This was a particular game where I may have been the one who destroyed the objective. I don't really remember, because I come to this position often and I take a shot at that objective number 2 and I run behind the rock, and you'll notice that it's really not that well defended. We've got a bat chat over here, And then if you look on the mini map, you'll see that there's a lot of tanks that are kind of approaching the area. But if they had defended this place, I would have been dead. But they weren't defending the place. They weren't shooting at me. They were too far away. So that's why I ran to this position. So always look at the objectives and look at the mini map and try to figure out which one is the least defended using the tab button, looking at the mini map, and other techniques that you know. And maybe do a recon flight and use all this information to decide which objective to target. Now, what I'm going to show you is something that is not generally known by World of Tank players. I've discussed it before, but I've never heard anyone else ever talk about it. And that is that you want to hit the enemy tank, or in this case, the objective, at the point that it's closest to you. This tank is the WZ-132, and it has a certain amount of penetration. But look what happens. I'm hitting the closest point of that objective, and notice that the reticule is green. But look what happens when I aim a little bit lower. It turns orange. And when I aim to the side, it's orange. But if I go back to the closest point, because we're at a little bit of an angle, it turns green again. Just moving it to the side or down makes it less likely to penetrate. So remember that when you're shooting, for example, at objectives or even at enemy tanks, you want to hit at the part of the plate that's closest to you. If you draw the angles on a piece of paper, you'll see that what I'm saying is true. You get a better penetration angle on that closer plate. The other thing is you can shoot at this little thing that's sticking out over here. If this is orange over here, this part over here will probably be green. So if you don't think you're going to penetrate over here, try aiming for this piece over here. One strategy you want to use, if you cap E and F at the same time, I always tell my allies, go for objective 4. And the reason why is because both flanks are going to merge together. And you're going to overwhelm the enemy. The enemy's going to spread out their defenses, and they tend to not be defending objective 4. You know, obviously there's going to be games where they do, but it often doesn't happen. They're going to spread out over here because they have tank destroyers or whatever. So tell your allies, if you see the situation where you've got two flanks that can merge together for objective 4, type in chat, go for objective 4 and merge the flanks together. And you have to be very specific. Merge the flanks together, go to objective 4, overwhelm them. Otherwise, people won't understand. One thing you might want to do is check your AP rounds or APCR rounds and notice where it says average penetration distance, and it says 182 at 100 meters, 179 at 200 meters, 168 at 500 meters. You want to know these values. Now, I don't know if there's a sudden drop-off between 99 and 101 or if it is something that happens gradually. Unfortunately, that's something you'll have to find out externally to this video. But what you do want to know is the difference between the 100 meter and the 500 meter. Notice it says 182 versus 168. Let's check a different tank. And this is 225 to 204. We'll check this one. And this is 198 to 175. And this one is 260 down to 232. This one is 204 down to 181, 245 down to 219, 186 to 163, 217 down to 200, 242 down to 220. So you're seeing, like, let's say around a 10% drop off in penetration values, which means that the further you're away, the less likely you're going to penetrate, for example, the final objective or any tank in general. You're gonna see greater variances in different tiers. In a lower tier tank, like over there, we only saw a 10% difference. But let's look at a tier 2 tank. You see that this is a 20% difference. It went from 50 down to 40. This one went 27 down to 19, which is over a 20% difference. I'm going to check a mid-tier tank. 169 down to 154. 227 down to 200, which is about a 10% difference. So you might have as low as a 10% difference and maybe as a high as a 20 to 25% difference. It's not always going to be tier 8 tanks that you play in Frontline. There was a time when it was tier 10 tanks. So be aware of the penetration drop-off. This objective is 397 meters away. And the way the game works is that when you look up the penetration in-game, it might show you an average value, but there's a drop-off based on distance, and it's different for AP rounds, and it's different for APCR rounds, etc. The penetration doesn't change for HE. So if you're using AP or APCR, you want to know what that drop-off is. You want to know at how many meters there's a drop-off value. So if you're within a few meters, you might want to get a little bit closer to get higher penetration. For example, going from 397 to 387 is not going to give me better penetration, but going from 397 down to 100 is definitely going to give me better penetration. So know what the drop-off values are, how many meters away, and what the penetration drop-off is. Some rounds are going to have a very small drop-off value when you get closer or further away. However, there's going to be some that have substantial changes in the penetration, so be aware of what those values are. If you just cap D, you're either going to have a fast tank, a slow tank, or a moderate speed tank. If you have a fast tank, you should go to objective 1, and if you have a slow tank, you want to go to objective 2. This is a general rule. Doesn't always apply, but in general it does. And the reason why is because if you have a slow tank and you go to objective 1 and you got a lot of fast tanks on your team, and let's say there's 3 or 4 fast tanks on your team, they're going to get there before you do, and they're going to kill that objective before you do. And you're going to be halfway there, the objective's going to be killed, and then you have to start heading towards objective 2, and then the fast tanks are going to get to objective 2 before you do, and you're never going to make it, so you're not going to be a part of the game. So if you've got a slow tank and you're at D, try to prioritize going towards objective 2. The strategy might work for other caps also. If you want to sneak behind the enemy lines and go to, let's say, objective 1 or objective 5, my opinion, and it's not always true, is to go as far north as possible. What most people do is they're going to go through the southern point of the final objectives to get across, because the desire is to get across to the other side of the map as quickly as possible. But you're more likely to run into enemy tanks when you're in the southern point. The good thing about going through this southern point is there's a lot of resupply points, but there's also some resupply points in the north. With the exception of objective 1, that's one that's hard to get a resupply point. So let's say you're at F and you want to go to 1, don't go across this bridge behind E, through the rails to 2 and then to 1. You're very likely to come across enemy tanks. Even if E hasn't been capped yet, and even if D has not been capped yet, you're often going to find weird tanks over here in the background. What I would do is go as far north as possible and take the bridges up here in the north to make it across. And if you're at D, do the same thing. Go as far north as possible, go through this entrance, go across this bridge, and then sneak across to 5. If you want to sneak behind enemy lines with a fast tank and go for one of the far objectives, let's say you cap D or cap F. You cap F, but you want to go and hit number 1. What I do is if we cap F, I'll run to number 2, hit it a couple times as I'm running by, and then continue on to number 1, and I'll sit here. If you do this method, there's a good chance you can kill it or do most of the damage by yourself. The enemy from 5 is eventually going to come after you, and the slow tanks are not going to come. A fast tank is going to come after you, and not only that, there's a good chance it'll be an autoloader. I've sat at 2 and tried to kill it, and I had less success because when they spot you, they're going to be shooting at you from far away, and they're going to have less time to get to you. So it's better to go all the way to number 1. One of the little secrets that very few people know about, right behind objective 3, let's say you kill objective 3, all you got to do is go a little bit down the hill and you can snipe across and hit objective 2. You see where the T-44-100 is? I don't know if you can do it from that position, but I know if you go to objective 3, go down the hill, there's a little bit of a wall, and then there's an opening. You can shoot right across, and people won't know that you're there. They don't expect you to be there. I saw a guy do it, and I haven't gotten to play the position yet, so it's definitely possible. Every objective, and of course every cap and every resupply, has an ideal sniping position, or sniping positions that are better than others. For example, with objective 2, there's a tall building, and you can sit right next to this part, and you're probably going to be able to penetrate that unless you have a really weak gun, and definitely if you're using APCR rounds. And it's very difficult for the enemy to find you here. They have to come around this building in order to get you. You see there's a T-28 over here. He's not going to be able to hit me. So you want to know these positions. Here's one for objective 1. There's these 3 buildings, and then there's this rock, and there's this building here. And it is actually possible to hit. You can see that there was a tank that was right over here that exploded when he was sniping on objective 1, but there are ideal sniping positions that give you a lot more cover. So find those positions. I'm going to make a video that contains all those positions, and you'll find them in my Frontline sniping videos. I don't have yet one that contains all the sniping positions just for the objectives, but it will be in the future. So keep an eye on my account and look for those types of videos. It is possible to snipe at the final objectives from, in this case, 639 meters away. Look at where I am on the minimap. I'm in Sector E, and I can shoot up there. If everybody on my team did exactly what I did, we'd be able to destroy that objective without the enemy even challenging us. So be aware that many of the final objectives have secret sniping positions where you can hit. It's not where the red is pointed right now, but over here on the side using high explosive rounds. You can see I did 68 damage. And in some cases with a high penetration APCR rounds, like maybe with an UDAS or an STRV, I might be able to damage this and do a lot of damage. And I know it's true for objective 1. I know a sneaky spot for objective 3. I know it can be done for objective 5. There's a good likelihood we're going to be able to find one for objective 4. Objective 2 might be a little bit more difficult. So be aware that this can happen. If you notice that damage is being done to an objective, but there's no enemy tanks in the area, you might have to scout around and figure out where the damage is coming from. And also, if you watch my sniping position videos, you're going to, over time, learn where all these positions are, and you'll be able to use them in the game. There used to be a lot more. If you look at my video, which is called Frontline Stealthy Turret Destruction, I show you from 2 years ago in the sandbox mode how easy it was and how much large amounts of damage I was able to do on Objective 2 and Objective 5 and Objective 1, and they changed the maps to make it so you couldn't do it. I was one of the sandbox testers, and I submitted my video to Wargaming, and they approved it so they could see how it was possible, and then they changed the maps. So even though it's possible now, it might not be possible in the future. And if you notice, look at my position on the mini-map and look at where I'm sniping at. You only have a little tiny window that you can aim for. It's a hard position to find. So they're difficult positions to learn. Shooting for the final objectives, you always want to hit them from as far away as possible. This is Objective 5. I knocked this tree down. I'm along the red line. Look at where I am on the mini-map. And you can see that the number 5 is at the edge of my spotting range. I can't really be that much further. I did switch to the APCR rounds because otherwise I would not be able to penetrate with the regular rounds. But you can shoot these from even further away. You can be further south and you can hit those targets. So try to be as far away from the objectives as possible when sniping at them. You're less likely to get spotted. There's 5 final objectives for the Epic Normandy map in Frontline. The easiest one is number 2. The second easiest one is number 4. The next easiest one is number 1. The next easiest one is number 5. And the most difficult is number 3. The reasons why is because 2 is usually lightly defended. And what you can do is go through these rail lines and get to 2, or you can drive through these buildings and sneak across and get to 2. And there might only be 1 tank defending, or often 0, but it's rarely more than 1 tank defending, and you can get to 2 fairly quickly. So 2 is usually easy to go for, and you can sneak through and show up there. Number 4 is usually easy because the enemy often doesn't defend inside the city. They want to snipe across the map. So they're going to set up sniping positions, and they're not going to be in the city. And the other reason why 4 is easy is because they can't snipe at you if you're next to objective 4. They have to physically relocate and enter the city and get right into where this position is if they want to damage you and defend. So 4 is the next easiest. The next one you're going to want to go after is probably going to be number 1. You can go where these 3 buildings are. That's a very easy position. It's very difficult for the enemy to shoot at you if you get within this little complex of buildings, or if you get between the rocks and the building. If you come around sniping on the side, the enemy expects you to be there, so it's going to be a little bit more difficult. But if you can snipe from here with a high penetrating round, it's also easy to damage number 1. So then you're going to move on to number 5. Number 5, you can come up along the red line and snipe number 5. And there's a position over here, if you've got a high penetrating round, you can damage number 5. Number 3 is the most difficult one to attack. However, it's only difficult if the enemy is giving some form of defense. And to be honest, lately I've been seeing more defense at number 3 because people like to sit up there to try and snipe. It's a horrible sniping position. They're not going to snipe at anything. But I'm seeing people there more often because they don't realize that it's a horrible position. And I go up there and I see nothing to snipe at, and eventually I leave. But it's often got only 1 tank is necessary to defend this. So number 3 is the most difficult. If you're defending the objectives, the enemy tanks have to be in a certain position in order to actually fire at the objective. And your natural instinct when defending is to do damage to tanks that are approaching the objectives with the intent of trying to kill them. But one of the things that you can do is you can track those tanks instead, which will delay them. It could delay them for about 10 seconds, and especially if it's near the end of the game. And that delay, it can prevent them from shooting at an objective when doing damage to them might not. So obviously if they're on low hit points and you're going to kill them, you want to prioritize killing them. But if they have full hit points and there's only a few seconds left in the game, tracking them might be the right strategy to preventing them from doing damage to an objective.